This is Linux in Laws, a podcast on topics around free and open source software, any associated contraband, communism, the revolution in general, and whatever else fancies your tickle. Please note that this and other episodes may contain strong language, offensive humor, and other certainly not politically correct language. You have been warned. Our parents insisted on this disclaimer. Happy, Mum? Thus, the content is not suitable for consumption in the workplace, especially when played back on a speaker in an open plan office or similar environments. Any minors under the age of 35, or any pets, including fluffy little killer bunnies, your trusted guide dog, unless on speed, and cute T-Rexes or other associated dinosaurs. This is Linux in Laws, Season 1, Episode 74, the one about GIMP. Martin, how are things?
Things are fine and dandy, thank you. Thank you. How are you?
I can't complain. Melting.
Are you? Oh, right.
Yeah, it's only about 40, it's actually 35 degrees here in downtown Frankfurt. We're recording this somewhere in December of 2022. Global warming has really gotten the better of Germany. And I don't know how it is in the kingdom.
It's obviously very localized, this global warming.
Indeed, Martin, indeed. So, anything to add on the weather front for the UK? I mean, I reckon summer has come and gone.
It's temporarily suspended again. Yeah. So
for the next 9 months, maybe.
Well, since most of the plants are dying and the farms are complaining, there's going to be some rain soon, which is very appreciated by many living things. So yeah, can't complain about a change of weather. Yeah, for sure.
As in within the next 10 months or something, maybe.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
Tomorrow, as early as that, okay. No, jokes aside, we're recording this somewhere in August, and people, if you're picking this up in hindsight, I hope you didn't hold your breath on the rain, because it may or may not have happened. Things certainly have changed, because normally summer was penciled in on the 13th of August if Met Office predictions are anything to go by, between 1 and 2 p.m. in a decent year in something formerly known as the United Kingdom. Maybe I'm wrong. Martin,
I'm not aware of any name changes, but then I don't read the paper. So.
Fair enough. You've lived there way longer than I have, so you're always a local. If that's anything to go by, no?
I didn't realize you've moved, but there we go. That's okay.
No, I'm talking about the UK now, sorry. But this is not the weather podcast.
No, it's not the weather podcast.
Exactly. But rather something called Linux In-Laws. And without further ado, we would like to welcome Kevin, also known as a hookah, on something called Hacker Public Radio. But Kevin, without further ado, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, thank you very much. My given name is Kevin O'Brien, and I adopted the pseudonym of a hookah on Hacker Public Radio. And I suppose if I had it to do over again, I might have said, oh, screw it, and just use my own name. But, it is what it is at this point. So,
why did you choose a hookah? Or
why a hookah as opposed to something else?
Yeah.
Well, that's possibly an interesting story. I'll let you decide. I was on a Jefferson Airplane fans mailing list.
Jefferson Airplane, cool.
Yeah, it goes back a ways.
Yeah.
We were, I'm 71.
For the younger listeners amongst us, this is a band.
Yeah.
I think it used to be a band, right? Because I don't think they're no longer. They're not.
They're not in existence anymore. So on this mailing list, we were talking about a Japanese version of their classic album, Surrealistic Pillow, and they had printed lyrics, but they weren't the right lyrics exactly. So there is a line in a song called White Rabbit, And the White Rabbit is based on
Alice in Wonderland?
Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland.
Nice.
And the line says, "Tell them a hookah smoking caterpillar has given you the call."
It makes sense after all, yes.
Well, the Japanese transliteration of all of that came out, "Tell them a hookah, the swooping caterpillar, has given you the call." And on the mailing list, this was hilariously funny and resulted in an ongoing running joke. The great god of hookah and all of that kind of stuff. So when I joined Hacker Public Radio, at the time, it seemed like everyone used pseudonyms. So I thought, well, I'll use a hookah as a pseudonym, and then it just kind of stuck.
Fair enough. Kevin, thanks for the explanation here. The reason why we decided to invite you on the show is quite straightforward. Given your comprehensive list of episodes on GIMP, we always wanted to do an episode on GIMP because it's one of the most important, open source projects in the graphical tool area, I reckon, regarding open source. But rather than reaching out to the project, we want to have a user's perspective on things. Right. So without further ado, give us your kind of 2 cents, given the fact that you have done multiple episodes and we all appreciate the fact that we are all learners. Right. Never mind how long we use a software. Because, for example, I've been using Inkscape, which is a scalable vector graphics editor for the last at least 10 or 15 years, and I'm simply discovering new features anytime I use it. Same goes for GIMP, is to say. Maybe now is the time for you to shed some light on how you arrived at GIMP, why you still use the software, and what you think is a good and bad topics about this software.
Well, okay, a little background. I was once a college professor, and no doubt I will pay for my sins on that, but one of the things that I learned in the course of doing that is that the best way to learn any subject is to have to teach it. It forces you to really dig into things, and you start developing the art of saying, what kind of questions would someone have at this point, and can I address that right now? So that's part of my background. Now, when it comes to GIMP, what motivated it was photos that I have. I'm 71 years old. I got photos over many decades at this point. And the ones that I've taken recently are smartphone, and they're fine. I don't really need to do a whole lot with any of those. But when my wife and I first met, we were shooting slides on film. And we wound up with boxes of slide trays, and, they just sat in a closet somewhere. And I thought, I really need to do something with this, and I should digitize, and I started doing that. And I talked about that in my GIMP series, that, the process I went through of digitizing. And with the old stuff, the photos were just not good. There were lots of problems with them. Artifacts on the images, colors had gone screwy.
You mean the original photographs? Right.
Yeah. Well,
right.
Whatever I had at that point, which was either a slide
or slides,
or a negative or what have you, they just weren't in good shape. And I thought, I got to be able to do something to fix them up. And that's what led me to GIMP, because GIMP is, more than anything, a photo editing program. That's really what it's made to do. Yeah, you can get it to do other stuff. If you want, you can create logos in it. Although if you have Inkscape, I don't know why you would, but but for editing photos, I think it is the best open source program that I'm aware of for doing that.
I'm not sure if you followed the history of GIMP, but GIMP is ancient, if any commit history is anything to go by, but it sort of also had some serious impact, I'm tempted to say, on general graphical user interface development. Perhaps for those two listeners in the old audience that do not know the history, maybe we can kind of shed some more light onto this, Kevin?
Well, to be honest, I don't know a whole lot about the history of GIMP.
When did you start using it? Sorry, do you remember the kind of year or how long ago?
I used it once or twice 10 years ago, but it didn't stick. And that was because GIMP was doing things in a different way. And you know how it is when you get into a piece of software and your intuition says it should do this and it does something different. Well, that was what was happening to me. So when I came back to it, I did what I could have done the first time and didn't bother to, and that is to say, let's get into this systematically, take it a step at a time, figure out how they're doing things. And the thing with software, that at least this is how I think of it in my mind, is that too often when someone tries to tell you how to use a piece of software, they tell you, well, if you want to do this, you click here. If you want to do that, you click over here. And I think that's like the worst possible way to teach people about software.
Okay.
And if you go back and look at my LibreOffice series, a lot of what I did was to say, don't worry about that right away. Let's start with what should you be doing with this software? How should you be thinking about it? And as I dug into GIMP with that mindset of I got to figure out how you think about this kind of stuff. And the more I dug into it, the more I realized it's all mathematics. Everything you do is based on mathematical algorithms. And you can figure out what those algorithms are in some cases. Sometimes the documentation will even tell you what the algorithms are. But that was what finally got me going with it was, okay, math I'm comfortable with. I'm not really an artist. My wife is an artist. So, she's got all the artistic talent in this family, but I'm good with math. So
what was it used to teach?
Economics.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah,
Which is not too far off when it comes down to math. But swinging back slightly to GIMP now, Kevin, just for the two people in the audience who do not know a little bit of the history about GIMP, I've been using GIMP for the last almost 20 years, and you can read. I mean, you found the link in the show notes, but GIMP was somewhat influential, and I'm going to keep this short and sweet because this is not a history podcast, but rather a podcast about user perspective and some other things. When GIMP was first devised, the idea was to create a cross-platform graphical tool for the purpose of editing images. Needless to say, cross-platform means OS X, meant Windows at the time, and also Linux distributions, for want of a better expression, because we're talking about late 90s now. Thing is that you needed some abstraction layer from the actual operating system, because at the time Linux ran something called X Windows. Windows was Windows, and OS X ran its own proprietary window manager. Right. So what the team actually did, they created something called GTK. GTK. Thank you, Martin. One day. yeah, we go with Martin.
Why don't you tell people what the abbreviation stands for? Might be easy.
Yes. GIMP Toolkit, I think it's called, or something else. Or Graphical Toolkit? G. It's been a long day. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Martin, say it once again.
GTK.
Thank you. GTK.
GIMP
exactly.
Toolkit.
Yes.
Yeah.
GIMP Toolkit.
Yeah.
The idea was to create an abstraction layer from the actual operating system. And when a number of other people first had this idea of doing something called a graphical desktop, which later developed into something called GNOME, they actually used GTK as the abstraction layer from the actual operating system, which first and foremost was destined at Linux. But if you take a look at the number of GNOME-based applications available on other operating systems, including Windows and OS X, needless to say, the stuff you can install with Homebrew and all the rest of it, I think the proof is actually in point that GTK made the day in terms of abstracting away the original operating system functionality and put this onto a high level of abstraction. And that's exactly what you see in the modern software architecture if you take a look at any GNOME application. And it all goes back to something called GIMP at the end of the day.
I probably missed a lot of that because I don't use GNOME.
Fair enough.
I'm firmly in the KDE camp.
No, which is this is what free software is all about. At the end of the day, it's all about choice, right? But if you take a look at the platforms that GIMP is available on, it's Linux, macOS is Windows is FreeBSD or StarBSD, as in it's also available on OpenBSD and NetBSD, on Solaris and also on Amiga OS. So cross-platform checkbox ticked.
Right.
Never mind the influence it had on other development efforts, including GNOME and the other stuff. So, but this is not it. But so much for the historical rant. Back to the issue at hand. What would you consider the most important or visible, let's put it this way, shortcomings if you're talking GIMP?
Right now, the biggest one is that it does not properly support print.
Define print.
Well, if you're gonna prepare something for high quality color printing, you really need to have a good CMYK model built into it, which GIMP doesn't really have. It doesn't have the print production aspect, which is one of the reasons why my wife, for instance, who has to deal with this, well, doesn't have to deal with it much now because we're retired. But when she did have to deal with it, I could tell her how wonderful GIMP was, and she would say, yeah, can't use it. I've got to use Photoshop because I got to be able to send this off to the printer and have a reliable, have it print the way I designed it.
And how long was that ago?
We've been retired for a couple of years.
So, because if the change logs are anything to go by, GIMP has made some strides in particular that area, as in pre-production raster image processing kind of front end support.
Yeah, well, they're making progress in a number of areas, but you asked me what is the main thing I see missing, and
absolutely
right now, the people who do this for a living are, by and large, not going to be using GIMP if they're interested in print production. I think GIMP was initially oriented much more towards the web, and so the focus really was on producing images for computer screens, and it does a great job of that.
What would you see, or what would you consider the most prevalent advantages of GIMP, apart from probably the cross-platform aspects?
Well, I love that it's cross-platform. There are certain advantages that gives you. I ran into something, back talking about photography. If you're familiar with raw images,
Yes.
yeah. So, working with raw images, there are ways you're supposed to, the documentation says something should work, and then in reality it doesn't. So, raw images, you should be able to, excuse me, you should be able to begin editing them within GIMP, and then GIMP is supposed to call an external program that will actually deal with the raw image parts, and then have the image come back into GIMP after that's done. And in Linux, I just ran into problems getting it working.
Okay.
So I went into Windows and it worked fine.
Which is an interesting perspective, because when I started to use GIMP, as I said, almost 20 years ago, we only had Scheme. That was the scripting language of choice. And I think Python support was brought into, 6 years ago? I can't even remember. But what I always loved about GIMP was actually the possibility to extend this through plugins. So, for
Right.
example, I was preparing a number of images for a website. Details may or may not be in the show notes, depending. But I was looking for an approach or a solution to emboss images with a certain copyright notice. And that's exactly when I came across the scripting possibilities of GIMP, because at the time it was only a few lines in Scheme, as in the Lisp interpreter built into GIMP, that made this possible. And I thought, wow, that's a great thing, because you don't have to do these 500 images manually. You can push them into GIMP. You do the scripting framework, do the rest, and then you have these images embossed as you see fit. Have you ever used scripting?
No, can't say that I have.
Okay.
I mean, I may get into it at some point, but so far scripting, it's not something I need to know for what I want to do.
Every user is different, I suppose.
Yeah. And I dig into things because I have it's an itch that I have to scratch. And right now I'm approaching the photos that I'm working on one at a time, because the problems in each photo, are different. So it's not something that lends itself to scripting.
What sort of fixes are you doing to your photos?
Well, there can be a number of things depending on, first of all, with a lot of the old slides and negatives that I work from, I need to do some cropping.
Okay.
But you have to crop each photo individually. So that's one of the things I'm going to do. You get these things where it's like white borders all the way around the photo, and sometimes you see a little bit, if you're working from a negative, you'll see a little bit of an adjacent photo showing up on the side and stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay.
Some of them, there was physical, a scratch on the film or something that turns into an artifact on the photo. I've got some where the color balance was, it just, something happened over time. And I've got some photos from my wife's, she did a trip years ago, it was before we met, with some friends, and the photos from that are all green.
Okay.
Something happened to the color balance there.
Yeah.
Other photos, it may be that the exposure wasn't quite right, so it's either over or underexposed. These are all things you can correct in GIMP, and that's really what my motivation was that I could get in there and do stuff like that.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And did it, I mean, how much effort did it take you to get to grips with all that stuff with GIMP, just to give those people who haven't used GIMP before some idea?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I probably went a little bit beyond strictly what I needed because, once I started doing the series on GIMP, it was like, well, I need to at least cover the basics of these things for it to be useful to other people who are listening to the series. So, I started digging into, how layers work and how they interact with each other and stuff like that. But also because you need to use those techniques to fix a lot of these things. If you're going to fix a photo where maybe one part is a little underexposed, another part looks okay, you might want to put in a layer mask so that, you're only affecting the part of the photo that you need to change and not affecting the other part. So you need all of these techniques in your toolkit before you go in to fix a photo.
Okay, got it. I mean, it kind of begs the question: did you start out with GIMP, or did you try any other photo editing software to start with?
No, I started with GIMP, and one of the reasons is that it's free software. And when I say free, I don't mean free of charge, although I didn't have to buy the software, but I am making monthly donations to support development. That's I always believe you should support people who are producing the software that you use. So there's something that something called it's a language, Gaggle, and there's developers working on it, and it's probably over my head entirely, but it was something that I thought I could support. And it's I'm not talking a lot. I'm talking $1 or $2 a month. Going to a developer here.
Well, these things keep the projects going, right? It's a very important point that you raised.
I always try to do that. With LibreOffice, for instance, every couple of times a year when I download upgrades, I'll take a moment to donate $10 to the LibreOffice.
Nice. So I take it you're a long-standing, let's say, Linux user then, rather than any other proprietary operating systems.
I have one Windows machine because I do enjoy gaming, and right now there are games that I like to play that I cannot play on Linux reliably at this point.
That's fair. Yeah.
That may change. I also have one Chrome box. It's a Chromebook. Whether you call that open source, I'll leave to you to decide. I know there's Linux at the base of it, but mostly it's just because it was inexpensive, very lightweight, and it's good for like when I'm traveling. I can just take it with me. One of the things that I like to do when I travel is to keep a diary every day, so that I know, I can recall what we did, where we were, what we saw, that kind of stuff.
You mentioned Windows, and when you moved some of the GIMP stuff from
Mhm.
Linux to Windows, did you encounter anything else that the reason why I mentioned this is quite straightforward. If something on Linux didn't work rather, and then you moved it to Windows, there must be a reason for that. But did you encounter anything vice versa in terms of something that didn't work with GIMP on Windows, and then when you moved to the Linux, it did work out of the box?
Well,
I'm curious.
I haven't, but the reason for that is that most of the time, that Windows machine, I have it. I use it for a few things, but I live in my Linux machine.
Okay.
So, I wouldn't just say, "Oh, I'm going to work in GIMP today. I'll open up my Windows machine and go there." That wouldn't occur to me.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's you mentioned gaming, right? So to me, that suggests that your Windows PC has a more advanced graphics card, or has a fairly advanced graphics card. So it may
Yeah,
potentially
yeah.
more naturally be more suitable for something like a GIMP, right?
Well, it certainly is sufficient to run GIMP. I've got a good graphics card in my Linux machine too.
Okay, fair enough.
And if it gets to the point that I can run all the games I want to run on the Linux machine, I can probably lose the Windows box.
Have you ever tried Wine?
Yes.
Games.
Not the liquid, presumably.
Sorry, I'm talking about the Windows emulation layer running on Linux.
Yes.
Fine, thanks for the hint there.
No, just clarifying it.
I have. It hasn't always worked well enough for me.
We are explicit, so I can't say that Wine used to be a bitch, because you had to have the exact version of the exact DLL you needed actually to get a Windows binary up and running. Apparently, links may or may not be in the show notes. Things have changed a little bit. There's a website called Wine Headquarters where you can actually search for a DLL or an executable, and then it points you to the right DLLs. But if current law is anything to go by, it's still not as simple, especially for games, to set them up so that they can run under Wine in a full-blown Linux environment. At least that's my perspective from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And since I have the Windows box here, I haven't really been highly motivated to dig into some other way of doing it.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So, my bias is towards using free software, but, obviously I'm not a fanatic about it.
Well, it's just the fact is that the gaming world is very much still Windows oriented, right? So
yeah,
you don't have much choice if you want to run things, and things like Wine just aren't performed enough.
And before I retired, I had to use Windows at work everywhere.
It's quite well established in the corporate world, as we all know. But
so I hear anyway. Yes.
And it's
I guess in the hipster land that you live in, Chris, it's mainly Macs.
Mostly, and of course Linux.
Sorry,
but hey, what do I care about the corporate world, Martin? Anyway,
right.
I'm only
it's also my wife also runs Windows, and I'm her tech support. So.
My commiserations.
Yes, sounds like fun. Going back to GIMP, sorry. If you wanted to anybody who hasn't used GIMP before, right? What would you say is a good way to start learning it apart from using your podcast? Of course, but, it sounds like you've really started doing it all yourself and taking it apart and trying to work out how everything works. But
obviously, aside from listening to my podcast,
How many GIMP podcasts have you done again? Sorry. Do you have a count? Do you never stop counting?
25, 30. I don't know.
Okay, very good.
Links definitely will be in the show notes.
Yes.
Yeah. The workflow that I have when I do these shows is that I first write what I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
So I do it in written form as like an essay on a topic. And those essays go on my website. So I have a website, and it's called ahuka.com. And there's a whole section of GIMP, and you can see all of the, I think there's probably close to 30, but, so you can just read through them, and that also gives you images. It's the weird thing about doing a podcast about a graphics program.
Yes. Yeah, it's gotta be.
You can't see anything. And yet people seem to like it. So, what the heck? Then there are, and I refer to them along the way. There's a lot of resources available. I think one of the best is YouTube. There are a few people. Mike Davies comes to mind as one of them, and Chris Parker is another one, and that have done a ton of tutorials on YouTube. And so there you're going to get the visual aspect. You can actually see their screen and what they're clicking on and what they're doing. And I find those very helpful. If you take a look at either the show notes for the shows that I've done or go to my website, I put in links to all of these things. So anything that I've used in the course of preparing my shows, I link to it. So you're gonna be able to follow back to this where I got. So I like the way I look at it is, I said, I'm not the expert. I'm a student. But what I'm good at is finding who the experts are and learning from them. That's what
and clearly you're very good at explaining it on doing GIMP on a podcast. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts on GIMP before we wrap this up, Kevin?
I think GIMP is fantastic. And encourage people to get into it, but understand that like if your previous experience was Photoshop, which interestingly was developed right where I live, GIMP is a little different. Doesn't do things exactly the same way. So best way to do it is just drop any preconceptions and approach the software in its own terms. What are they trying to do? How are they trying to do it? And then I think you find it is really extremely capable software. You put me on the spot to say, name one thing it doesn't do well, and I named what I thought was the biggest.
Which is fine.
But even that they're working on.
Yes, absolutely.
And, what I see is a project that is in vigorous development. We're waiting now for the 3.0 release. And I know they're working on it. And it's just a question of when are they going to decide it's ready to be released to the public. And that could be tomorrow or it could be in January. I don't know. But I think that's going to make some fantastic strides, and it's going to address some of the problems that maybe people have had.
Almost similar to Debian, where they release a new stable version when it's ready.
Yeah.
I reckon
That's
Devin is
sensible approach.
exactly. In contrast to the studies approach of canonical, we do it every
Yeah.
half year. They just say
Ready or not.
release
Yeah,
it,
that's
publish it, ready.
Right.
Exactly. Yes. Canonical, if you're listening, the
Debbie will
email,
release every
the email,
5 years.
yeah. Canonical, if you're Mark Shuttleworth, if you're listening, the email address is sponsor@linuxinlaws.eu. Simply send a mail.
Yeah.
We can change the wording if you want to, based on the amount that you donate. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay, Kevin, I don't know if you've listened to one of the previous in-laws shows, but we normally do something called the Poxies at the very end of the shows, which is essentially a pick of the week. Something that has crossed your mind during the last 2 weeks or something that you see worth mentioning. Martin normally goes for inside scandals on the government of the kingdom. I normally go for movies or the other way around. I can't even remember, but really anything goes. Books, movies, whatever. Or actually, as a matter of fact, I also mentioned recipes on previous shows, depending.
Okay. Well,
so off you go, Kevin.
I like games, and the games that I like are strategy games, what are called the 4X. If you're familiar with that, explore, expand, exploit, exterminate.
Excellent. Makes sense to me.
Yeah. And in fact, I'm working on a series for that because, Ken is always looking for shows, and I kind of mentioned offhand on Mastodon, where a number of us have accounts there, that maybe I could do something about games. And a number of people said, yeah, we'd love to have you do something on games. So I've actually started working on that, in the course of which I rediscovered an old game that turns out is absolutely fantastic. So it's not anything new. In fact, it goes back to about 2000. And it's a game called Alpha Centauri.
Okay.
Wow. And so it's part of the Civilization franchise, if you've heard of Civilization.
Right. Yes, of course. Yeah.
So this was one of the games they did back in 2000, and I got into it after having not looked at it in probably 15 or 16 years. I started playing it while we were on our RV trip out west and just fell in love with it all over again. It's a fantastic game. So that's what I'm going to mention.
Okay. Martin, any thoughts on this? Since you're the game player of the two of us.
Alpha Centauri, wow, that's a long time ago.
Okay,
I can't say I ever played that one, but
okay.
Yeah. I think the thing about games for me is really the complexity of them these days before you get any good at them. Let's put it that way. They used to be really simple, right? Just shoot some aliens coming out of the sky and off you go, right? But nowadays there's so many complications and things that you need to know to beat all the 12-year-olds, right? Let's put it that way.
Excellent. Making progress now, Martin, aren't we?
So basically, stick to one game. Then at least you got a chance. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, it'll only take you about 20 years or something.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay, Martin, so what's your POX then?
My POX, I'm currently binge watching Deep State, which is a what do you call it? I don't know. I guess a conspiracy theory.
I thought it was one of these documentaries.
Well, yeah, it's you could call it a documentary, but yeah.
I see. Donald, if you're listening, the email is you.
Actually, this is pre-Donald time, right? This is
okay, fair enough.
What's his name? What was his first name? Bush.
George.
Thank you. Yes. Sorry. Yes. Anyway, that kind of era, right? Anyway.
Okay. Deep State, interesting. So it didn't start with George, did it? I mean, Deep State
Well,
goes back when to kind of the founders or something.
It's been
And
going on
I'm not
for probably since the Middle Ages, right? If not before.
exactly. And when I mean the founders, I don't mean Thiel and Musk and all the rest of them that founded PayPal. No, I'm talking about the founders of the US, what is now known as the US. People, links to the relevant conspiracy theory websites may or may not be in the show notes. You never know. Okay, my pox of the week is actually something much more safe, let's put it this way, in terms of not being on controversial grounds. It's a TV series.
You feeling all right there, Chris?
No, I'm not, as a matter of fact. But thank you for reminding me, Martin. No, it's something actually that is close to Martin's home, which is actually Sky Arts. It's a TV show called Urban Myths. I think it dates back to the 2016s, 2017s, maybe 2019s. It has a beautiful take on something called urban legends, funny enough. And the episode not to be missed out on is actually season 3, episode 1, where a guy called Freddie Mercury and a friend take a little known lady called Diana Spencer to a gay nightclub. I won't reveal any further spoilers, but it's actually an episode not to be missed. It's probably one of the best ones of that whole show. And with that, Kevin, thank you very much for attending.
Yeah,
and being part of it. That has been more than interesting, especially your user's perspective, because we normally have projects, and need to say the projects being projects have a certain view on things, but it was actually a very refreshing change to get a user's perspective on the show in terms of a first-hand insight from somebody not coding the code base, but rather somebody using the code base.
Well, thank you. I think that is important. Software is too important to be left to the coders.
I couldn't agree more.
Yes, they are a breed of their own.
This is the reason why we still use computers, Martin, right? Anyway, it doesn't matter. And with that, people, thank you for listening, and see you next time. This is the Linux In-Laws.
You come for the knowledge,
but stay for the madness.
Thank you for listening.
This podcast is licensed under the latest version of the Creative Commons license, type Attribution Share Alike. Credits for the intro music go to Blue Sea Roosters for their song Salute Margaret, to Twin Flames for their piece called The Flow, used for the segment intros, and finally to Celestial Ground for their song Sweet Justice, used by the Dark Side. You find these and other ditties licensed under CC at Jamendo, a website dedicated to liberate the music industry from choking copyright legislation and other crap concepts.